Hey, Larry Vickers here. Welcome to the Larry Vickers podcast, presented to you by Firearms Trainers Association. Good guys. Today, it's all about the P320, Sig P320. I'm going to take you through what I know about the platform. Now, not too long ago, James Ruppy and I of Vickers Guide fame visited Sig up in New Hampshire and got pictures of the current products and some historical stuff and whatnot. And so we're putting together a Sig Volume 1, mainly focusing on pistols, but also with some subgun stuff. It'll be out later in 2020. Pre-order is available now, per se. But we delved into the P320 and the P250, which was kind of the predecessor to this gun. I learned a lot on the platform. Here's what I'm seeing in my classes. Striker-fired guns dominate. All right. Number one brand, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is the Glock. Remember, the Glock wasn't the initial polymer frame handgun, but certainly the most popular by far. And the Glock still dominates to this day. I'll have classes where there's nothing but Glocks in the class. But the gun that's coming on strong as the solid number 2 is the P320 series. Very popular. The modularity, which is something we're going to talk about here in a little bit, super popular with the gun. Americans, one of the things Americans love to do, whether it's cars, motorcycles, guitars, you name it, is we love to customize our stuff. There's some good things about that, and there's some bad things about it. It's one of our strong suits. It's one of the things that's been great about this country and great about the American persona. And the fact that you can take a P320 and swap it out and it's so modular is something that has really worked out for Sig. And it's definitely kudos to them for designing the gun that way. So I was able to get immersed in the P320 series when I was at Sig in New Hampshire. And then now that I'm seeing more and more of them in the class, and I've got one to shoot in the class, I'm becoming a little bit more well-versed on the platform. That being said, still fairly new to the platform. I'm going to give you some of my early impressions, some of the stuff I'm seeing in classes, and some of the stuff that I'm learning along the way when I'm shooting the gun. So I'm going to kind of give you my take. This may evolve over time. I may do another podcast a year or 2 years from now where I can go, hey, did an initial podcast on the P320, and let's talk about what I've learned in the next year or 2 years. All right, so this is my first take at this platform. I don't have near as much time behind it as I do a Glock, but I've shot it enough to give you some of my input. All right, first off, quality gun, accurate and reliable. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why that is, and I'm going to talk through some of the variants we have here. Now, Sig has so many variants of the P320, it can be very confusing unless you actually work at Sig Sauer. And my guess is even they get confused at different times. There's so many variants and sub-variants. There's modularity. You can put this slide on this frame and back and forth. It can become very confusing. We're going to kind of talk through some of the models here and then some of the stuff that you commonly see with the P320. First up, let's talk through this flat dark earth compact version. Now, in the U.S. military, this would be, with a thumb safety, this would be the M18. That's what you would see here. Kind of the Glock 19 size gun, and what you see in duty circles, whether it's law enforcement or military, very common now to see guns in that Glock 19 realm as a duty gun. Very common. Initially, that gun was brought out like the 19 as more of a concealed carry gun, but we found out it was a great gun, kind of a one size fits all. Not necessarily ideal for concealed carry. There's guns that are smaller, maybe a little bit better of a fit, but it is a gun big enough that you can use it as a duty gun. And Delta, as a matter of fact, did that back in the day with the Glock 19 on somewhat of a limited basis before they went down the path of the Glock 22. So that's where you see this. This is the M18 style gun from Sig Sauer, flat dark earth. Like I said, the M18 platform is going to have your ambidextrous manual safety, flat dark earth. What's interesting in talking to the guys at Sig, this almost has one of the first gen style frames. The military adopted this frame. They made it small, medium, and large. This is a medium platform, and you can see that right there, compact medium. So that tells you it's a medium-sized platform. All right. Essentially, the controls are the same. Here's your mag catch. There's a reason why you always see replacement frames and stuff with the mag catch installed, because as I understand it, this is not an easy mag catch to swap. So that's why you see like the frame from Wilson Combat, or if you see some of the other frames on the market from Sig, it has the mag catch in it, and that's why. Now, to Sig's credit, they did a great job on the mag catch. Great job. It's just the right length. It's not too long to cause problems for concealed carry, and it's not too short that if you're using it with gloves or competition use, it's a problem. They did a great job on the mag catch. And myself and Jeff Cahill at Tango Down, we started diving into the 320 series and the P365 recently, becoming a much more popular pistol. We made a lot of Glock accessories over the years, so it makes sense. Hey, this is the U.S. service pistol. This gun's not going anywhere anytime soon. Why don't we start looking at accessories for the P320 series and also the P365? One of the things we looked at with the mag catch right off the bat is there's no reason to improve it. We made Glock enhanced mag catches for a number of years, both Gen 3 and Gen 4/5, but no reason to update the mag catch on the P320. Sig did a great job with it right from the start. Ambi slide stop here. A little bit on the small side, but interestingly enough, it's still pretty usable. I normally would like something that's a little bit bigger, but it's in a decent location. One thing you got to be aware of, gang, if you're a guy that likes to keep your thumbs tight to the frame, you can run into a problem where your thumb interferes with the slide stop. You need to be aware of that. It can also be an issue with Glocks and whatnot and HKs. So if you're a guy that runs your thumbs in tight to the frame, that can bite you. All right, so you want to make sure you keep your thumb out well away from the ambi slide stop. Profile-wise, it's a little on the small side, but it's in a good location because you can actually use it. You can lock the slide to the rear with no problem, and you can release the slide with no problem. Like I said, I'd prefer for it to be a little bit bigger, which you have room to extend it a little bit to the front. You really don't have room to extend it to the rear, and the reason being is the versions of this gun with a manual safety, the manual safety comes up right up behind the ambi slide stop. So you really don't have room to pull that slide stop to the rear in your design. You can push it a little bit to the front. Shape-wise, it's not bad, all right? It could be a little bit better, I think, in terms of being able to push the slide up to lock the slide to the rear, but it's certainly something you can get by with. Got to remember though, sometimes the controls being a little bit bigger is a plus, because if you have gloves on or whatnot, or the gun's wet and you need to manipulate the slide stop, sometimes it's a little bit better if the controls are a little bit bigger than what you see here on the P320. Takedown levers up front here, of course, you have a half moon scallop, and you have to pivot this down to make sure that the magazine's out of the gun. They also have a feature where you can't pivot it down with the magazine in the gun, which is a plus. You don't have to pull the trigger to disassemble the gun. The one thing about it though, and I'll tell you this, and I'll show you this on the Wilson gun. This is my personal Wilson Combat P320 that I did. I run a high grip, or a finger forward grip, all right, like that. What happens for me is the front of that takedown lever can bite me during recoil, and it becomes rather uncomfortable. As a guy in the unit said, when I experienced discomfort, all right, which I thought was pretty funny. But I can experience discomfort when I'm shooting the gun with my support hand thumb up here on the front of that takedown lever. So one of the things I did on my Wilson Combat one here is I radiused that edge, and I'll show you that when I get to this gun. All right. Overall, like I said, accurate, reliable guns. Yeah, they have a little bit higher bore line than you see with guns like Glocks and whatnot, but it doesn't really seem to matter that much. You know, Sig has been known for higher bore lines over the years. You look at the P226, for instance, the most popular Sig double action, single action handgun in the world, had a fairly high bore line, but the guns were very controllable. The special ops guys that used them, like Navy SEALs, loved that gun. British SAS used it. The guys who shot them fast, the bore line really wasn't much of an issue. So, and you're kind of seeing that here with the P320. I think that whole bore line issue above the hand is kind of overblown. Is it better to have the bore line lower? Of course, nobody's going to dispute that. Is it as big of a deal as people make it? I don't think so. All right, so yeah, it does have a little bit higher bore line than you see with guns like Glock, but in the real world, is that a big deal? I don't think so. All right, now, one thing about it is magazine. Magazine is designed, in this case, to hold 15 rounds with this particular frame. Here's what I'll tell you. Like you see with a Glock, when you load these things all the way up, not only is it a bear to load that last round, but it becomes tough to seat it with the slide forward. So I would tell you, like with a Glock, and at least until you get the recoil spring kind of compressed and broken in, you want to look at this as a 14 round mag, and one for the full size gun as a 16 round mag instead of a 15 and a 17, just like with a Glock. Remember, with pistols, you want it where you load it all the way up, and you want to be able to pretty easily push down that top round just below the feed lips. That allows it to make it easy to seat with the slide forward. That's one of the things with Glocks and whatnot, and you can even run into it in 1911s. Unless you're real firm and positive about seating the magazine, it's easy to have it where it's not seated all the way. And now in the next round, the magazine is not in position to feed because the magazine's not high enough. So be careful with that. You may want to treat this as a 14 round mag instead of a 15, at least until the spring gets broken in. So you need to check that out. Like I said, from my experience, accurate, reliable guns, not real lube sensitive. All right. So if you just lube it normally, you're going to be okay. I'm not a fan of these guys that run Glocks and whatnot, and they basically run their guns dry. That to me is the bad plan. That translates to guns like the 1911 and the AR-15 or M4. And if you run either one of those guns dry, it's a matter of time before the gun starts shutting down on you. So you need to lube these, just like with any other firearm, but it's not a real heavy lube-sensitive gun like a 1911 where you got to lube it hardcore. All right. So that's it on this size gun. One of the things, this has the enhanced trigger on it. Back in the day, a couple years ago, Sig Sauer had an issue with if the gun was dropped a certain way, the mass of the trigger would actually come back and fire the weapon. They've since had a recall. They've since had an upgrade on guns. If you have one of the older guns and you want to get it recalled, you can send it in. But the guns they've been making the last couple years have not had that issue. And this has the lower mass trigger, if you will, if that's what you want to call it, and you can identify it with the thinner shape versus the earlier trigger, which was a much fatter trigger with a more robust shape to it. All right, now, let's put this down. Let's roll over to this one. This is a gun that accentuates the modularity of the P320. As a matter of fact, my buddy running the podcast over here, this is Justin's pistol from back in the day that he did some horse trading with. He got it specifically because it came with the Sig optic. All right, and it comes with the Sig optic already mounted, the whole 9 yards. You have sights that are high enough that you can see in the bottom of the optic. Sig is one of the companies along the lines of FN and whatnot who've really promoted mounting optics on their gun. Unlike FN, they've dedicated and made their own optics. Now you can mount different optics to the Sig, but they come basically set up and they steer you towards using one of their optics. Now, kind of a full-size slide, P320 slide, front grasping grooves, all right, rear grasping grooves, just like the one on this FDE Compact. Now, this has a different style frame. This is the kind of enhanced style frame that you see on the X5 Legions and along those lines versus this one. Now, what they told me at SIG when I was up there, this frame was in development when that weapon was under trials by the U.S. military. And when it was adopted, they were in this older frame platform. This frame was one that was in development, and what you would have seen on the M17 and the M18, if that process had continued on, you would have seen a frame along this line on that gun. So that's why this is kind of considered the older gen frame that's going to be around forever because the M17 and M18 use it. But this is kind of the second gen or enhanced or updated frame that you by and large see today on the P320. All right, notice you got a mag well in place. It has an adaptable mag well, an extended mag. All right, now this has a flat trigger. I believe Justin said he had the Gray Guns trigger put in, and the X5 Legion series has a flat skeletonized trigger as well. This is a much lighter trigger, has an excellent feel because of the flat trigger. I've used flat triggers for years, and it gives you a better leverage. It also gives you a different feel than I used it in 1911s back in the day, much to the chagrin of my buddy Ken Hackathorn, who thought a flat trigger in a 1911 was just blasphemy. He felt like that John Moses Browning would have struck me down with lightning if he could have. He was turning like a lathe in his grave anytime I used a flat trigger in a 1911. I quit using a flat trigger in a 1911, not because I didn't like it, because I liked it a lot. Inevitably, I would build a gun for myself. I'd shoot it for a while. Somebody would want to own it a lot worse than I do, meaning they had a fat checkbook. And inevitably, they would have me swap the trigger out. And they go, hey, I'll buy the gun as is, but can you put a standard trigger in it? And I'm like, So after a while, I went, you know, why am I doing this? So I just started putting standard triggers back in my guns because I knew eventually 6-9 months down the road, somebody else was going to own the gun because they wanted it worse than I did and had the bank account to back it up. So instead of having to take time to swap the trigger out, I just put a standard trigger in it. That being said, I always liked the feel of the flat trigger, and I still do to this day. I like this flat trigger on the Sig series of P320s and like this gray guns trigger. If you notice, my Wilson one here has a flat trigger on it, and I like the way it feels. Has the same style takedown lever, has a little bit different ambi slide stop than you see on this one. A little bit different gen, a little bit different configuration. It's still perfectly usable like this first one is. All right, it's pretty minimalist. There isn't much to it, but you've got enough bite where you can lock the slide to the rear if need be, and you got enough bite you can drop it with your thumb. Like I said, I would like to see it a little bit bigger with maybe a little bit more of a half crescent shape. And then this is in fact one part that myself and Jeff Cahill are looking at possibly doing for the P320. And I'm going to tell you which part we did first. It's going to be hitting the market real soon, shortly. All right, but this is one we're investigating. We looked at the mag catch hard and we decided there's no reason to tackle that because Sig did a great job with it. We are looking at a slide stop to possibly make a Vickers Tango Down enhanced version of the ambi slide stop. And like I said, it has a standard takedown lever up here, so this is going to bite me just like it would with any other takedown lever unless I modify it. Okay, this frame, this has a configuration that I really like, kind of the M17 configuration. You have a frame out here that doesn't go all the way to the full length of the slide. Sig has different P320 variants that do that, and you can see this compact version does that. On the full size, when the frame goes all the way to the end of the slide, I think it looks a little goofy personally. They do that on some of the X5 guns, especially the ones that have the tungsten frame for a little bit more weight up front. And I get that for a competition gun, but my personal feeling is when you have this, which almost has a 5-inch 1911 look to it, where it's cut back a little bit. The M17, for instance, has this setup. I think this is a good looking full-size P320 setup. Now also notice one of the things you see on the Wilson Combat frame as well as this frame, if you would, a second gen P320 frame as opposed to the first gen one right here, you see they've done this scallop right here on the frame, which is a real plus. Honestly, Glock could take a page out of this book because they cut it up higher and scalloped it back. And when you feel it, you notice the difference immediately. I like that. Kudos for Sig for doing that. Also, kudos for Sig on having the ability to add a mag well easily, and it's a mag well that's well designed for the gun. It's not an afterthought. Those other manufacturers out there are polymer striker fired guns, where later on the aftermarket, the accessory market, or even the manufacturers themselves try to come up with a mag well that kind of fits in with the gun. Sig, to their credit, designed this frame, kind of the second gen P320 frame, to take a mag well right off the bat. And also the mag well is perfectly usable. The standard magazine well is perfectly usable without a mag well on it. So they did a good job on that. One of the things you see on these real common is people stipple them for additional texturing. That's one of the things Wilson did a good job on. Sig could probably pick up the slack on that. And to their credit, Smith & Wesson did a good job on this on the second gen M&P. The texturing is much more aggressive. So it's real common to see guys do it themselves, like Justin, my podcast video guy here, did, or they send it off to somebody like my buddy Ben at Boresight Solutions, who does a magnificent job at texturing these guns, just like he does with Glocks and whatnot. The guy does a killer job at Boresight Solutions. So that's a real common feature. And the good news is it's not terribly expensive. It's something you can send off. You could have the gun stock or whatever you want and send it off and get stippling done. And it's not going to break the bank. All right. Now, what's interesting is, Ken brought this up to me, and this is a little inside baseball that you guys might not know, is if you look at the barrel on a P320, it has a heavy chamfer around it. And you go, well, what's that all about? Well, Bill Wilson, when he started going down the path of making their P320, said, I can tell you why that is. The feed lips are much shorter than they are on other guns, so they release the projectile sooner. They release the loaded cartridge sooner. So they need that chamfer, so no matter how it's released, it's going to guide into the chamber. And that's something that's a carryover from the P250. If you compare these feed lips length to say the feed lips on a Browning high power, which all these pistols like this are copied from, the Browning high power mag, or the P226 or the Beretta 92, the feed lips are longer. They hold the cartridge case longer before they release it. This gun, like the P250, releases it sooner, so they have that heavier chamfer around the chamber, so no matter what, it's going to go into the chamber. And obviously it works because these are reliable guns. I mean, Sig Sauer has these things nailed. They're accurate and they're dead-ass reliable. All right, so that's kind of your modified modular P320 there. A good example of a gun that with a different frame, you have your frame chassis inside, piece of cake to swap it out with the disassembly lever, install it. And remember, your serial number is attached to or engraved on your chassis inside, so you can swap this frame or the slide in the barrel as much as you want, and you're not affecting the serial number component, essentially the frame in the eyes of ATF. You're not affecting it at all because here's your serial number, and that's on the inside modular chassis. Sig just recently launched the ability where you can buy that modular chassis on your own. You don't have to buy a complete gun to go along with it. You can buy the modular chassis and then you can build the gun and accessorize it from there with the grip you like, the slide you like, the barrel you like and whatnot, and then you have the modular chassis by yourself. It'd be the equivalent to, more or less, buying just a strip frame from a 1911 and have the gun built. The only difference there is once you do that, you're kind of pregnant with the 1911. You can switch it around a bit, but not nearly to the degree that you can do the P320. I mean, Sig, you got to give them kudos for that. They nailed it on that regard. Okay, now, let's move on to the Wilson Combat P320. Now, let's go back a little bit in history. My buddy Ken Hackathorn visited Bill Wilson down at his ranch in Texas. We've been friends, but Ken's been really good, close personal friends with Bill for many decades, from the beginning of IPSC more or less and on. I've been friends with Bill for a number of years, met him years ago shooting competition. Ken was down at Bill's ranch in Texas, and Ken got to handle the prototype of the Wilson Combat P320 frame. And Ken told me, he goes, dude, they nailed it on the frame. The frame is absolutely dynamite. The way it feels in the hand, the texturing, it's just sensational. And he's right. It has come out now. You can buy the frame module, the strip frame module with a mag catch for around 60, 65 bucks. When you can find them, they're almost always sold out. And you can retrofit your own P320 with this grip frame module, and it is killer. Everyone that grabs it likes it. I mean, Wilson Combat nailed it. To their credit, they nailed it. Now they've offered complete guns. Now this is one they kind of did for me. Okay, I got a little bit of a blue card or a blue chip type situation with Wilson Combat, and it's kind of almost a pre-production prototype, if you will, of their optic-ready version of their P320. As far as I know, they have not released this yet on the market. I've heard these things are selling like gangbusters in this current market. They probably can't keep up with the production of the standard iron sight one, let alone introducing one that takes an optic like this Acro P1. This is directly attached. The Acro P1 is directly attached to the slide. The interface is machined right into the slide, which is the way I prefer it. I don't like adapter plates. I only use adapter plates when I absolutely have to. I prefer my red dot, and I've been running the P1 for a while. We'll talk about that red dot here in a second. I prefer it directly attached to the slide with no adapter plate. This is a standard height Wilson Sig P320 sights, and you can see them in the bottom field of view, no problem at all. Wilson brought their complete gun to the market. It uses a standard Sig barrel, which I was a little concerned with, but once I started shooting it, this thing shoots lights out. I'm sure Wilson saw that. There's no reason to come up with an aftermarket barrel when these things shoot as good as they do, and this thing is super accurate. They got their slide, they do their own machining, which is in the X-Tac fashion, or as my buddy Ken Hackathorn calls it, who's in his mid-70s, so you gotta throw him a bone there. Exception to the rule, he calls it X-Track. It's not X-Track, it's X-Tac. So they do the X-Tac style pattern on the rear grasping grooves, front grasping grooves, and on top of the slide. All right, now this has the Gray Guns trigger in it. It has a Gray Guns enhanced trigger module. And one of the things I did to it has the standard ambi style slide stop that the Sig comes with. But one of the things I did too is I took the disassembly lever right here. All right, make sure you guys can see it good. I took the disassembly lever right here and I heavily chamfered and radiused this and hit it with some memory cloth and melted the front of that disassembly lever. And now what that does, and then I sent it off to the guy who does black nitriding for my buddy Ben at Boresight Solutions. And now when I grip the gun and fire it during recoil, that front edge of the takedown lever does not bite my hand. Now myself and Jeff Cahill are going to be having a meeting with the powers that be at Sig soon over various modifications. This is one of the things I'm going to bring up to the guys at Sig, is they need to look at making this an option or a rolling change in the design, because I'm not alone on this. There's other people like Ken Hackathorn and other guys that when they shoot the gun, that disassembly lever bites their thumb. I'm not alone. This simple radius, heavier radius and chamfer completely fixes the problem. I got to tell you, when this gun first came out, the Wilson Combat P320, I was a little concerned about the price. I kind of thought maybe the gun was a little overpriced. It's the most expensive of any P320 variants on the market. Not counting the Aimpoint optic on here, but when you see this gun tricked out the way it is, as Wilson Combat sends it with the optional Gray Guns trigger, it's not a cheap gun, $1,300-ish. And I was like, man, that's significantly more than your higher end P320s from Sig. I got to tell you though, I got it. I've been shooting it now in several classes. The thing shoots lights out. If you're looking at what I think is the king of the P320s, this is it. Now I'm going to let you decide whether or not it's too much money. That's kind of up to everybody. Has to decide what's too much money for them. I don't know what you got in your bank account. Some people may not be able to afford it. Some people maybe, you know what's too much money. I'd rather go in a different direction on the handgun. And I get it. I understand all that. But if you're, in my opinion, Larry Vickers' opinion, if you're looking at the king of the P320s, the Wilson Combat P320, which is made in this version and also the mid-size version, this is it. This is the gun. Shoots lights out. Great gun. Okay, that's kind of what I got on the P320s. However, before we close it out, let me talk about the Aimpoint Acro here real quick. I'm a big fan of the Acro. The way it mounts, in my opinion, almost has a little miniature Picatinny rail that is like a rail grabber with a cross lug for recoil control. So the optic, it doesn't get a lot of back and forth. I'm a big fan of the way it mounts, big fan of the field of view. It has really good vertical field of view because of the way it mounts and the battery being on the side. You don't have the battery pack on the bottom that robs some of your field of view. This has great vertical field of view. All right. Also fully enclosed optic. So it's fully enclosed. Mud, sand, dirt, debris is not going to interfere with your ability to see the optic. It's not going to interfere with the diode itself, which can be an issue for open emitter optics. Now, some people complain about the size. The reality of it is it's a little bit misleading. If you took the other optics on the market and made them fully enclosed, they would be of similar size to the Aimpoint Acro. This is a different approach. It's fully enclosed, so therefore the profile is different, the size is different. It's kind of apples to oranges. It's not fair to make a fully enclosed optic comparable to one that is an open emitter, open optic. All right, so the size isn't really much of an issue in my regard. All right, one of the things about it you got to be aware of is battery life. Aimpoint's working on that. This thing on setting 6 has like a year and a half battery life, which is great. Here's the problem. Most people in different lighting conditions are going to use it setting 7 or 8, and then the battery life is reduced dramatically. So if you're a guy that uses it as a range toy, just turn it off. The battery will last a long time. If you're a guy that has it on constant on all the time at setting 7 or 8, I'd be looking at changing the battery out every month or so. All right. Now, Aimpoint's working on that right now, hoping to see a 2nd gen version of this optic with a longer battery life, hopefully fairly soon. Nevertheless, I still use it. I'm an Aimpoint guy to my bone marrow. I like the fact that it's super rugged. They tested this thing. It's far more rugged than any other red dot on the market. I promise you that. They tested this thing to death. I like the fact it's fully enclosed and the way it attaches. In my opinion, that puts it in a league of its own. And when they come out with the one with the extended battery life, it's going to be game over. All right, so that's it on the P320. Like I said, I'm still running this gun, still learning a lot about this particular firearm. I've been using Glocks for a number of years, also the HKVP9. I like both of those guns. I'm going to continue to use those guns. I anticipate the Glock will be the most common polymer frame striker fired gun in my classes for many years to come. But this is the gun that's going to occupy the number 2 spot. It already kind of does, and as time goes on and the military's using it, more law enforcement are using it, you're just going to see more civilians using it. And in my classes, this is, without a doubt, this is going to be the gun that's in the number 2 position. So my advice is, if you don't have a P320, kind of do your research, because they have a ton of different models. If you get a chance, go to an indoor range where they have rental versions and shoot them and figure out which one you want. And you need to have one of these things in your pile. It's not going away anytime soon. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something on the Sig P320 series. Have a good one. We'll see you back here. LAV out.